Hey everybody, Red Mage here. Welcome back to this series where I go through different RPG products that I have and give them a quick flip through and review. In this one I'm going to be going through 3 adventures where they're compatible with the DCC RPG. They're made by Studio9 Games. Recently I kickstarted a new adventure, Into the Dark, by this group, and there was a bunch of add-ons that I decided to add on, and a bunch of them were really cool adventures, and I wanted to go through 3 of them in this one. The first is Greenwood of the Fey Sovereign. This is a level 0 adventure, a funnel, or you can use it as a first level adventure. It's got some new classes and a new character sheet as well. This one's 20 pages. Another one that I'm going to cover is Reckoning of the Gods into the Shadow Realm, which is 2 level 3 adventures, although it really is 1 in its continuation. And then finally, Cathedral of the Undying, which is a level 5 adventure. All 3 of these are very interesting in their own way. They have, this one and the Reckoning have very interesting mechanics. An interesting idea that I haven't seen very much, and I think is pretty fun. The first one is just a really good funnel, and it's got a great dungeon, which is an above-ground vertical dungeon, which is fun, kind of a tower, although it's like a tree. So I'm going to go through each of them and quickly show you guys what they're like and why I picked them. As I said, there's a whole bunch from this pack. Studio 9 does a lot of great adventures. They also have some products like 101 City Encounters and things like that. And some of their adventures are for like Mutant Crawl Classics. And so, yeah, I'd recommend you guys check them out. So let's go through this one. Here's the tower. A map of the Tower of Isp. It's a great dungeon because, as you can see, you can take the ramp to any floor, basically, from the beginning. Or you can also stop in at any of the rooms as you go up. And so the players are probably going to find those as they go. There's also a bit of a timer. They have a few hours in-game to complete this dungeon. And so there's a sort of forest trek where they're encountering stuff in the forest. And then there's the tree itself. The idea behind the adventure is that you've been press-ganged into service, and you don't have much choice, and you've got to kind of move forward. And at some point, that even fades, and you kind of get lost in this, Fey forest, and there's not much you can do except continue to move forward. It's got a lot of read-aloud text, but it's a level 0 adventure, and so that's, kind of expected. It's kind of a rowdy thing. The players understand what they're doing. They have a bunch of characters. They're going in with these characters, and they're probably mostly going to die. Now, you could use it as a level 1 adventure, but the aftermath for the survivors feels very much like a transition from level 0 to level 1. The adventure itself is pretty funny and pretty cool, and it has the pretty typical DCC funnel form of, like, you go into a room, there's stuff there that you have to figure out, puzzles or fight, and probably it's going to claim a character or 2, and then you move on to the next one, right? And that's kind of how the adventure feels throughout. It's set into different parts as you kind of move through the forest, as you get separated from the press gang, and as you encounter the tower itself. There's great art throughout. All of these adventures have really, really good art, and it's in that style that we're pretty familiar with from DCC, from Goodman Games. So, it feels very much like a Goodman Games adventure. I think it's licensed by Studio 9, but that's the idea here. It's just a great piece of art there. You can see it's a lot of text, and if you're familiar with DCC adventures, this is kind of par for the course. DCC adventures have a lot of text to them. They intentionally, I think, lean into that older style, that kind of more classic design of dungeons where, some things might be italicized, some things might be bolded, you might have a stat block set aside, but mostly it's just paragraphs of text, and you kind of got to read through it probably beforehand. You got to make sure you know the adventure before you can just run it off the cuff. The Pursuit of Vengeance of King Leprolox. It's a Fey adventure, and so it kind of has a sort of whimsy and ridiculousness to it. There is a, jumping ahead here, there is sort of a Fey dragon kind of thing, a mist guardian thing, which is cool. At the very end, you get the Awakening, which is exiting, and it's sort of like a, hey, you're basically you're not satisfied anymore. You got to move on with your life and become an adventurer because you've had this experience now of whimsy and adventure and stuff, and it's too much for your regular life. And then there's a new class, a character class, the Wild Elf, and then you get some handouts, and then you get a new character sheet at the very end. For DCC, which is a really cool one. I like it a lot. So this overall, Greenwood of the Fey Sovereign, is a really cool little level 0 adventure. I like that dungeon, and it has that great form. And if you're looking for good funnels, whether to play as a one-shot or as the beginning of a campaign, this would be a good one to check out, especially if you are looking at something much more Dolmenwoody or fairy tale-y or Fey. Then you can use this as your intro. And I think it would work just fine with a Dolmenwood game, because you could just change some of the details. You're being press-ganged into the service of a duke or of an earl. That sounds an awful lot like lots of the stuff happening in and around Dolmenwood. And then you're dealing with a Fey Lord who has this tower and his servants, and they're not going to be happy about the incursions into their territory. And it's sort of a bigger battle in the background, but you could make it as big or as small as you wanted, and the funnel part of it would work just as well. Now, Dolmenwood has a different tone than just like going in and killing stuff, and it's not quite DCC, but you could, easily adapt that. And if you wanted to do it, well, here's your option. So, anyway, Greenwood of the Fey Sovereign. I think it's a really cool adventure. The next one, though, Reckoning of the Gods into the Shadow Realm, is really, really unique. It's really, really clever. There's two parts to the adventure, and the first part is more standard. You're going into a dungeon. There's, some puzzles, and it's a really interesting extraplanar dungeon, and there's some funny, tricks and traps and things moving around in odd... It's a wizard's extra-dimensional portal pocket dimension, right? So it's going to be weird, it's going to be funny. But at the end of it, you come into the room while he's being devoured by a demon that he's accidentally summoned. Or he didn't accidentally summon it, he summoned it, but through sheer bad luck, the demon got free, and now he's being eaten by the demon. But at the end of it, you get access to another portal, basically transporting to this dragon's lair and all of the treasure there. But there's a plan that he has already concocted, and he has the scrolls and everything ready for it, to rob the dragon through something called the Shadow Realm. Essentially, it's like a parallel dimension. And so rather than face the dragon directly, the idea is you go into the Shadow Realm, you sneak through its lair, you pop in, take treasure, pop back out, back and forth. And so it kind of becomes this dragon lair heist in the second half, which is really cool. And it's a great idea, right? If dragons can't see into the ethereal realm, if they're not present in the ethereal realm, or the Shadow Realm as it's called here, yeah, why don't you use that as an avenue of getting at the dragon's treasure? That's a really good idea. So you get started off by, he's stolen knowledge from the gods, and you're called upon by the gods. If you have a cleric in the party or a priest, then you get, kind of pushed in that direction. And there's some, again, pretty typical DCC stuff going on in here, kind of gonzo, over-the-top death traps, ridiculous descriptions of rooms, horrible, horrifying creatures. Yeah, it's a great adventure. It's again, pretty typical DCC in a lot of ways. But the second part, as I was saying, it's the lair of Woe Talon and Mount Karkarock. And what I really like about it is that you get the same map twice. You get the map in the regular world, and then you get the map of the Shadow Realm version of that world, sort of jumping between the two dimensions. That's really cool. I've seen that a handful of times, that sort of idea of moving between dimensions, but to have them directly linked and to have jumping between them be the main kind of idea of the adventure, that's new. At least I haven't seen that before. And so, yeah, it's executed really, really well here. You get the beautiful DCC maps, and the descriptions of the Dragon's Lair and then the Shadow Realm are all very, very evocative and fun and dangerous, right? This is a pretty dangerous adventure. Some great art evocative of the old classic image, right, of the statue with the eyes that are being pried out. At least I think that's the sort of reference there. It looks a lot like it. Rules for fighting in 3 feet of water, and there's lots of puzzles and little prayers and lots of handouts, which I really, really like. It's a really great adventure, honestly. There's a great piece of art of Woe Talon himself and his treasure hoard. He is an intimidating dragon. You don't want to just fight him, right? I mean, that's like, if you go in here and just go to kill him and he's awake, that's a problem. It's a very big problem. Most likely the goal is going to be to surprise or to steal the treasure and jump out through the Shadow Realm or do whatever you can. Because if you just go toe-to-toe with the dragon in DCC, you're probably going to get roasted. Here's the map of the lair. If you turn your head to the side, you can see the map of the lair. And it's a cool dungeon. It's pretty straightforward. There's a couple paths through it. But it's, again, pretty DCC standard in that you kind of have like a room with something happening and you move to the next, and there's a room with something happening. And they're all kind of weird and, over the top and classic. And then you jump here, which is the Shadow Realm version. As you can see, it's basically the same map, just this other world and other stuff's happening there, and it's not easy. So, you know, it's not just like, oh, hey, it's just as easy as the other world. In fact, there's something called the Worm Shade here, which is not necessarily an easy foe. But it's great that you have this jumping back and forth between these two encounters, or these two worlds. It's a really cool dungeon. I think Reckoning of the Gods into the Shadow Realm is one of the better DCC adventures that I've read. I really like a lot of the DCC adventures. I don't end up using them because I think they are a little bit often too gonzo for me. But this one is really fun, and it draws you right in. And again, that mechanic of jumping between parallel worlds I think is a really cool idea. The last one I wanted to cover here is Cathedral of the Undying, which is the highest level adventure. It's a level 5 adventure. And it's got a really interesting idea. The idea here is that the players are sort of expected to die over the course of the adventure several times. Up to 3. If you die a 3rd time, you don't get to come back. But for level 5 characters, that's actually kind of impressive. Like, I mean, it's a tough dungeon, in other words. And one of the things that the adventure mentions is that if the players don't know that they're going to come back, then especially if they get pretty far and then suddenly die, it's going to feel very, very unfair, because the dungeon itself is really unfair. It's really deadly. On the other hand, if they die early and come right back, then they're going to feel like, oh, well, we got this. So the book says, you know, you kind of got to just let the dice go, because there's upsides and downsides to either them coming back quickly or them coming back slowly or whatever. Just roll the dice, let it happen, and, you know, you'll have good memories of it after the fact. But try not to control that, or at least its advice is like, you know, you can't really control what the player's reaction will be. You kind of just got to go with the adventure if you want to play this mechanic. And I think that's cool. But there's something, it's also a little bit more complicated than that, because something happens to you as you start dying and coming back. It's not as simple as, oh, I'm just back as exactly as I was. And there's a benefit, a really cool benefit, if you can make it all the way through the adventure without dying. And there are really big downsides to dying midway through the adventure, but also ways of kind of undoing, at least one way that I found as I was reading through it, to undo the negative effects of dying halfway through. The idea here is that the undead are starting to rise in this cathedral. There's a cult here who is interested in spreading mayhem and death, and there's an eclipse of the moon, and it's all going wrong. And so you kind of tricked into going here to save the place, but actually they kind of want to trap you and kill you and make everything go really bad. It's got a great map of the cathedral. Kind of isometric, you know, looking at it from the side. But I think it's a good map. And again, one of the things that I really do like about it is there's multiple ways in to the complex, multiple ways out. Although not really, you're not probably going to be leaving and coming back and leaving and coming back. And lots of fun tricks and traps and things to run into as you're going through it. It's another one of those sort of funhouse dungeons in a way. Here are the rules, for undeath ritual and their effects. The first death, you come back in 1d4 rounds with 1 hit point. And your second death is you come back, but now you're partially undead. And depending on your alignment, you have a slightly different set of abilities, a slightly different effect, and also a different way of redeeming yourself. And you're either a ghost if you're lawful, a wight if you're neutral, or a ghoul if you're chaotic. And there's, again, a different way of kind of returning. And then finally, if you die a 3rd time, you just become a zombie and you immediately turn on your allies. And then you're dead for good. So, it's an interesting idea here. One of the things that I also like about this is that summoning spells are different slightly. So the proximity to the plane of the dead and Undying is so close that portals and summoning spells inadvertently reach into the grave, bringing forth 1d4 undead whose hate for the living makes them aggressive towards the closest living beings. So you can accidentally summon skeleton zombies or ghouls if you have portals or summoning spells or things like that. And also, of course, necromancy is more powerful in here. Once again, you have a ton of read aloud text, and that's just true, I think, for all Studio 9 adventures, but also just for DCC adventures generally. It's kind of the style that they've settled into, and that it's common in that, for this particular kind of adventure. A lot of people love it. Some people don't like it. I think it's not too bad. It's good writing. It's interesting. It's fun. Often kind of really gruesome, and especially this adventure, pretty gruesome. But also funny at times. There's a sort of whimsy to DCC that even when it's being gruesome and gross and kind of, disgusting and over the top and gonzo, there's that gonzo. Yeah, the gonzo funniness that's there as well. Over the top, wild, and wacky. Lots of undead, right? Lots of undead in this adventure. Killing lots of undead, going through graves and potentially digging in them or trying not to trip into them or going through the churchyard at night. Yeah. Fun stuff. There's a hedge maze and some interesting tricks and traps about that hedge maze, or tricks that hedge maze can do to you and can turn things around and get you very, very confused. It's a good adventure, just like the other two. I mean, I think it's a fun one, and that idea of having players start to die and then come back, I think, especially if they don't know it's coming, but then once it starts to happen and there are mechanics associated with it, they'll realize, oh, it's actually intended. You're not just like being nice to me and letting me come back alive. It'll start to have a different effect. I think it'll have a distinct feeling, certainly. At the very end of the book, there are a couple handouts that you get, and then just the back. So there's not as many handouts as some of the other adventures. For example, not nearly as many as the second adventure that I covered. This is a great adventure for like Halloween, right? Run it as a one-shot. Make level 5 characters, or if you've been playing a campaign for a little while or a couple pre-adventures, then they lead into the Cathedral of the Undying for Halloween, and players get to come back as zombies or as ghouls, and they get to be ghosts and get to deal with a lot of undead and try to make it through. And it'd be a fun kind of, again, wacky gonzo funhouse Halloween adventure or a spooky night adventure or something like that. So anyway, I think you guys should check out these 3 and really all of the Studio 9 adventures. If look through their pages on DTRPG and stuff, and go to their website, see if it's something that appeals to you, because there's a lot of really cool ones on there. These are 3 that I found to be particularly cool, but I think there's a lot more that I could have done. And there's also, again, useful supplements like 101 city encounters or 101 hex encounters, things like that. So this has been Cathedral of the Undying, a level 5 adventure for DCC, Reckoning of the Gods into the Shadow Realm, 2 level 3 adventures for DCC, and Greenwood of the Fey Sovereign, which is a level 0 funnel or a level 1 adventure, also, again, for DCC. I'll put links below to where you guys can get them all. All right, well, I hope this has been interesting, everybody, and I'll see you all in another video.